ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणीम्. स्थितप्रज्ञ, a man of steady wisdom, a picture of perfection. He is someone who has reached the pinnacle of spiritual achievements. All of us are interested in him, for we look at him as our own spiritual potential. In his introduction, Sri Shankara says, Siddhasya lakshanani sadhakasya sadhanani. The description and the characteristics of an enlightened one become the guidelines for practice for a seeker on the path. Though when we take somebody as a role model, when we take someone as the ideal, we may pay a price for the gap that is created between what should be and what is. It may cause its own difficulties. All the same, we must say that saints and sages have always provoked everybody else, rest of mankind, to strive towards that state of perfection which seems to be with them. All others would, after appreciating their freedom, all others would want it. How can we too be free of self-created bondages? Becomes the question with everyone. I made a statement that this gap between what should be and what is creates certain confusions. Perhaps I should explain it briefly. Many a time, ideals and role models make us lose sight of ground realities. We are so fascinated by what we want to become that we do not pay enough attention to the mistakes that we are doing in daily life. However, we hasten to clarify that anybody who is intelligent within a short while recognizes this problem, and then he or she takes care to keep in mind on one hand the state of how one should be, and to pay attention on the other hand to day-to-day realities. It's like, as Vimla Thakar says in one of her writings, it's like going towards a distant hill. Even as you are walking towards the distant hill, you do two things constantly. Time and again you look at the distant hill and sort of guess or gauge how far it is, how much more distance you have to walk. And time and again you also take a look at the few steps right in front of you. If you see only the hill over there and don't pay attention to the few feet in front of you, you may fall into a ditch. And if you put your head down and you are over cautious about the immediate next few steps and do not see where you need to reach, that may also cause a certain distraction, digression. You may end up somewhere else. The human mind is many times torn between ideas of what we should become and notions, I would use the word notions, of what we are. And the intelligence, once more, within each of us keeps working. As Sri Nisargadatta said at a certain place, one requirement for realization, if we are to ask him, what is the one major requirement for enlightenment, for realization, for self-knowing, he said, it is earnestness. If you are earnest, then whatever mistakes you may do will become evident to you. For in this matter of self-realization, all the necessary intelligence is within you. Rest assured that you don't need some vector calculus or some special knowledge of microeconomics or all those subjects offered in the universities for self-knowledge. In self-knowledge, what you need is a certain bunch of simple human values, and you are very much capable of these values, such as earnestness, we mentioned already, truthfulness, honesty to oneself, leave others aside. If you can be honest to yourself, if you do not compromise with your own aspirations, you don't let yourself down, think of it, then saints and sages assure you that you are well set. In psychological confusions, many a time we deceive ourselves. We live in self-deception. But if we are earnest, we realize, hey, whom am I fooling here? Let me be true to myself, and that will take care of all these problems. We yesterday began taking a look at Lord Krishna's description of this man of freedom, and I had taken care to make a statement right in the beginning that it looks at first instance that we are studying a book, Bhagavad Gita, or we are trying to know somebody who is free. It looks it is about a book or it is about somebody over there. Actually, through the book and through this man of freedom, we are trying to understand ourselves. It is all about self-knowing. It is all about self-knowledge. Not just the self of the Vedanta with an uppercase S, that is said to be the goal. There is a lot to know about the self with a lowercase s. And what is this self with a lowercase s? This little self, this I, me and my, this little center in you and me which harbors, which anchors pride, shame, guilt, fear. Who has fear? Who has shame? Who is nervous? Or who is proud? If we were to ask, we get an answer, right? Well, who else? I am proud. I am feeling guilty. I am ashamed. Check up again. Who is this I? Certainly it is not the I which is described by the Upanishads as the self with the uppercase S. For we are told that pure Atma, self with the uppercase S, has no problem of any kind. So it has no guilt, no pride, no shame. Do you mean it is shameless? Well, it is shameless, but not in the usual sense of the word. It has no hang-ups. But then, what is it that we see about ourselves? We do have all these problems. Therefore, this ground reality on a day-to-day basis, this thing that we perceive as this is me with all these fears and whatnot, is the self with a lowercase s. Popularly or unpopularly, it is called the ego. So we got to understand our own ego. Someone commented wittily, ego, E-G-O, is what edges God out. When we are caught in the ego, then God is far away. When the ego is made to subside, when the ego dissolves in a certain higher understanding, the Advaita Vedanta goes to the extent of saying, we realize we are one with God. Elsewhere in other schools of thought, it is said, we come very close to the divine. We enjoy proximity to the divine. Call it proximity or call it being one with the divine. Certainly, it is way up compared with the state of egoism, where there is so much of misery. So, someone without the egoism is indeed hard to understand. Let's read once more the last verse we read, namely 2.56, the 56th verse, in which an expression needs a little more explanation. We will do that and then proceed further. Please read the 56th verse. Repeat after me. Dukkeshvanudvigna manaha Sukheshu vigataspraha Vitaraga bhaya krodha Stithadhir muniruchyate. Together. Dukkeshvanudvigna manaha Sukheshu vigataspraha Vitaraga bhaya krodha Stithadhir muniruchyate. Such a person is called Sthita Dhihi. Dhihi and Prajna are synonyms. So Sthita Dhihi is the same as Sthita Prajna, one whose understanding is totally stable, one who wavers not in self-perception, one who does not permit, as we explained yesterday, false labels to arise and then victimize oneself. I am higher than others is one label that we are all given to take upon ourselves, and at other times the label we put on ourselves is I am not as good as she, her or him. So these are labels. None high, none low is the insight of the saint. As Mahatma Gandhi was deeply touched by John Ruskin's book, Unto the Last, he later wrote a paraphrase of that book, and he titled his summary or abridged version of Ruskin's book, Unto the Last, he titled it as None High, None Low. Of course, we know Mahatma Gandhi was not a man of this self-realization. We tend to believe that he was not in that kind of consciousness, though perhaps he was pretty much eligible or pretty close to it. He was a man of great dharma, great nobility in him, and he looked at this same principle of being free from egoism more in the context of relating to the society, serving the society, Harijans or caste Brahmins, whites or blacks, literate or illiterate. He challenged himself to look at all of them equally. None high, none low. No bias of any kind, no gender bias, no racial bias, and no bias even on the basis of some behavior of a person 2-3 days ago. Somebody might have acted rather wrongly 3 days back. But is it possible for us to meet that man or that woman today with no grudge, with a certain openness? You did a mistake 3 days back, but we welcome you. We look at you with a fresh mind. We will see you today with fresh eyes, and we hope you will not repeat that again. But what you did 3 days back will not interfere with our treatment of you. That itself speaks for much nobility. So, Sthita Dhihi, I have again tried to explain, this Dhihi, this Prajna, this understanding, all are divine, all are children of God. These are the many poetic expressions people have used, and different expressions appeal to different people. Let me not go more into mere linguistics. Sthita Dhihi, one of steady wisdom, also called Muni here, one who is as though established in an inner silence. One of the meanings of the word Muni is one who is very much in Mauna. That doesn't mean outer Mauna. Outer Mauna many times doesn't take us anywhere. Outer silence. Then we become non-functional. Outwardly we need to give, we need to take, we need to discharge our responsibilities, we need to do our duty. But is it possible, even as we gain somewhere or lose somewhere, even as we are praised somewhere or somewhere totally neglected, is it possible for us to have an inner silence, not the silence of some stupidity or some unconscious state, but we are very alert, we have fully taken cognizance of what someone did to us, and yet there is an inner silence. We are watchful. So that alert silence makes one a Muni. And obviously, since she or he is alert, there is a certain reflection going on. There is a certain contemplation going on. Therefore, Muni is also described as Manana Shilaha, one who is given to Manana, that is contemplation, that is certain mature reflection. When somebody insults you, rather than simply reacting and rolling up your sleeves and planning to take revenge or teach him a lesson on all these things, you, out of that inner silence, think about how come he behaved like this, and what would be appropriate for me to do. Let me not simply like a machine, that means mechanically react. Let me see what is the right thing to do here. I would rather go for what is right than something suggested by mere conditionings, mere ideas of who I am and who he is, mere status consciousness, as we say. Generally, we are made to act by certain status consciousness. We ask people also many times, do you know who I am? And we frighten them. But someone like Ramana Maharshi would laugh at it. That is the question I want you to ask all the time. Ask yourself who I am. Who am I? You are asking others, do you know who I am? Ask everybody. The whole town knows who I am and you seem to not know. Are you a visitor? Have you come newly to this town? And so on. Our arrogance comes out in such expressions. Those are, to say once more, born of certain status consciousness. Who is free from status consciousness? We Swamis also, after giving a few lectures and after having some people listen to us for 3 evenings, become very conscious of our status. You know, when I talk Gita, so many people hear me, and so on. It gets into our head. Hardly anyone can escape. It's so difficult to cleanse our mind of these images. Sometimes a positive image, sometimes a negative image. Can we be free of images? Which doesn't mean literally you don't have any idea of who you are. As yesterday I took pains to explain, you would use a certain identity strictly by context. In front of your daughter, you are her father. In front of your wife, you are her husband. In front of your teacher, you of course are the student. And in front of your student, you of course are his or her teacher. But then, as we took it up yesterday, while watching sunrise, you don't say to Surya Bhagavan, I am her husband, I hope you know. I am that man's father, hope you know. The sun would laugh. At times, let me put it, at a number of times, and those occasions are plenty. On number of occasions, this idea of I am high or I am low is utterly unwarranted. Nobody is asking us. But memory, we'll go into it more as we proceed. This memory is a very strange phenomenon. We may as well say memory is bondage. Unwarranted memory is bondage. Functional, necessary and relevant memory is of course necessary for us to go about our business. So this Muni is described, now the phrase which I wish to slightly elaborate, Vita Raga Bhaya Krodha. What is Raga? That is the key word, attachment. Suppose you like something, that is not attachment. Suppose you liked something gave you happiness at a certain time, and then memory makes a conclusion. There is a conclusion stored in your mind that this object, this person, this place gives me happiness. Meanwhile, the object may change, the place may change, the person may change, and what is more, you too have changed a lot. But your memory says, no, when I am with that object, when I am with that person, when I am at that place, I will be happy. And an illusion is created of a permanence where really there is no permanence. What is attachment after all? It is clinging to a past experience and in the process losing sight of the present reality. When children grow up, you have memories of all their, childhood days. You remember as parents, let us say, how you had lifted them, how you had taken them here and there, how for years and years, in all those growing years, you had all those experiences. And parents typically, and Indian parents are notorious for this excessive attachment. In the West, I am given to understand there is attachment, but it is relatively less. The cultures rather encourages. Once the boy or girl is 18, he lives his life, her life. In Indian way of relationship, normally parents are very concerned. You can hear a father talking about, I am so concerned about my son. How old is your son? He is only 54. Yet, I need not explain. That means the memories have held this parent as a hostage. So attachment is clinging to the past. Now this is not a very pleasant teaching. Therefore spirituality in general scares people. A lot of people don't go anywhere near sadhus and saints because these bitter truths are laid before them, placed before them. Because if you think about it, to be free of attachment means to say goodbye to the past, means to die to the past. As though all that you have accumulated has to be just dropped. Like a hot potato, you have to drop it and move on. As though today you are a new person. You have no obligation, you have no old commitments and so on. It becomes a bit scary. How can we let go of the past? So, the tradition uses the word viveka. Exercise viveka. Nobody is asking you to literally let go of all memories per se. In a scientific way, let us put it this way, all that you are asked to leave is please say goodbye to those memories which have no relevance now, which have got outdated. Like you throw away medicines which are, which have gone beyond their expiry date. So, a lot of our memories have actually gone beyond their expiry date, but we cling to them. It gives us certain pleasure. Please distinguish pleasure drawn from actuality, from fact, and pleasure that is drawn by your investing, your pouring into that object as though through your thought processes certain value. I believe somebody saw a rock and he put a label on it. This rock costs $10,000. And after a week he came and said, this rock costs $10,000. I would like to take it. I would like to buy it. He only put the label. You put the label, you pour value into something through thought processes. Raga is like that. Attachment is due to certain experiences. Rather than going through the experience and taking them for their real value, you go way beyond and make some sweeping conclusions. Sri Krishna says here that among your so-called memories, typically there is a large percentage which need to be re-evaluated, re-examined. When you re-examine, and mind you, it is through such re-examination only that you can let go of invalid or irrelevant memories. By deciding, all right, you have told us to be detached, so Swamiji, for your sake, we were going to be detached from tomorrow. You will not succeed at all. Detachment doesn't come by through sankalpa, through decision. With due respect to the so-called willpower, so-called sankalpa shakti. People sometimes pride over their willpower. That is Veera Sankalpa, it is called. Some heroic decisions the people take and they stick to these decisions. Perhaps that kind of ability to announce something, to decide something, and come what may, to stick to those decisions, has some place. I do not really throw it away somewhere. It has some place in life, but in inner transformation, in becoming a new person, in having certain mature outlooks, to be spiritually mature, you don't go about the process through willpower. Willpower has limited value, if not no value, in this inner transformation of consciousness. In transformation of consciousness, if you ask me, if will doesn't work, what works, sir? I would say it is re-examination. When a certain attachment rises in you, look at it carefully. Look at it with fresh eyes. Evaluate it newly. You have gained lot of knowledge, you have gained lot of experience. Look at it in the light of all this experience. Then you will find some of your attachments, were just habits. By mere habit, you have been clinging to something. Things have changed. You got frozen in an earlier, time period. Wake up and welcome the new day. Welcome the new morning. Then there will be no raga. Then you become Vita raga. Therefore, in all these issues, certain slowing down and being self-aware is of utmost importance. When I say being self-aware is important, the reference is to other things that we generally do, memorizing some shlokas, read something and then immediately use it to advise others. Or you read some beautiful book and then you went around and talked about it to everybody. There was somebody who was very impressed by a certain book which was titled Power of Silence. He was so happy to read it because it was really a great book. 10 days he continuously talked about that book. And bought a few copies and gave gifts to everybody. On the 11th day he realized, hey, what am I doing? This book says, be silent, slow down, watch your thoughts, watch your emotions. Instead of doing that, I am talking and I am so excited. He realized, thank God, 11th day he understood. Better late than never. So how does raga go? Vita raga means free of raga, free of attachment. Of course, teachers like Swami Chinmayanandaji, to make matters easier for people, would put an adjective, free of false attachments. That makes it easier. Everybody, yes, I don't want to have any false attachment. And I think my attachments are all good ones only. Everybody would like to believe that his attachments and her attachments are good ones. It is the neighbor who has false attachments. But watch out. Your attachments probably are all false. That is also a possibility. In Buddhism as well as in the Vedanta, it is said that in one's so-called awakening, one empties out one's consciousness. One empties out. So there is this topic of coming upon an empty mind. It's a great topic. In Buddhism explicitly, in the Vedanta also, maybe using a little different language, it is meant all the same. Totally being free of all those attachments, all those false values that you had held on to. Take for example something like patriotism. Generally patriotism is not questioned at all, but it takes a revolutionary thinker like J. Krishnamurti, to whom I will not make too many references, perhaps it is not warranted, but to make one passing reference. He had the guts and he had that spirit to say, what is patriotism? It's a glorified form of tribalism, he said. People didn't like it. For all of us generally have been told, be patriot. And this Desha Bhakti, Desha Abhimana and so on. But from the heights of the Vedanta, Upanishads, from the heights of Gautama Buddha, the enlightened one, all humanity is one. And that doesn't mean that you become irresponsible. You love people around you, whoever is around you, without looking at their nationality, without looking at their color of the skin or all those, So the so-called Vishwa Prema. Think about it. Don't accept any statement just because it is said from a platform. Think about it. Is patriotism a glorified form of tribalism? The words sometimes have their own flavor. Tribalism is not a welcome word generally. He has tribal instincts. If somebody says, you don't like to hear that about you. But when somebody, he's a great patriot. Yeah, I am one. So one word is much welcome, much adored. Another is freedom of speech. In democracies it is adored. Communist governments would not. So you must be knowing that good old joke. An American said, I can stand in front of the White House and criticize the American president. I have the freedom. And in good old those days, the Russian replied, I also have the freedom to stand before the White House and criticize the American president. So, anyway, let me not get distracted. When raga goes, now there is not much need really to explain the other words. When you are holding on to something out of habit, not out of intelligence, out of mere past momentum, out of mere mechanical aspect of you have done it so many times and you just want to do again. You have been doing it. That's what is habit, right? Out of mere habit. Though really speaking, what you want to do, what you want to say is not required, or it doesn't fit well with the changed circumstances. But you just want to do it. You want to say it. You want to hold on to it. And if somebody comes in the way, you get angry. Somebody tries to tell you, sir, that is no more relevant now. Please don't do it. Please don't say it. You say, who are you to come in my way? You get hurt. Therefore, see, Krishna mentions krodha. Raga leads to bhaya, the fear of someone taking away from you what you are holding very dear to yourself. And krodha is the anger that rises in you. When somebody tries to take it away, you get angry with that person. Because by and large, all of us want to indulge in old glory. If 7 times I was praised at some place, 8th time I go, some youngster has come, he is performing better, he is more educated, he is more up to date, my technology, my knowledge or whatever field is old. But my raga says, no, when I come, I am the one to be praised. I must be received well here. These youngsters, who is he? Oh, his father studied under me. And such things. We have all these thoughts. I taught his father. That is all irrelevant. This young person, whatever is the field, technology or singing or dancing or whatever, he has better knowledge now. And sir, you have got old now. You are not performing so well. Therefore, it is graceful for you to take a seat in the front row and give your good wishes. But those who are attached to the position of being praised, being paid attention to, they don't like it. They get angry. They walk away. Or they get afraid in the first place. Therefore, please see once more, it is about inner cleansing, being free of notions. What is summation? The summary of all these notions is, as Maharshi Ramana would put, aham. I am this, I am that. Some notions rise and they create a shell of some kind, and we are caught in that shell. Can we break that shell of ideas and notions of who we are, and then take a second look at who we really are? That realization of who we really are is the spiritual illumination. It is the enlightenment. It is the, as Ram Das, the Western spiritual teacher, Ram Das, said beautifully, titling one of his books, he called it The Journey of Awakening. The journey of awakening. It's not a journey from San Jose to Los Angeles, but it is the journey of awakening from a dreamy, imaginary state, imagining I am this or I am that, to the realization that I am very fine without those labels. I don't have to have all those labels. I am just fine as I am. And Vedanta assures us, you are wonderful just as you are. Why do you cling to this or that description? We want to become somebody. We want to become something. It is praised so much in the world. So many of the world's affairs are all meant to train you, to prepare you to become something. And we are talking in the psychological domain. Inside you, that dependence on having to become such and such figure or such and such personality could be a bondage. Please do not go from one to its opposite. All along you have been wanting to become. Don't make a resolution now. Tomorrow onwards, all right, since you have said, I don't want to become anything, and so on. This is going from one confusion to its opposite confusion. Awakening is not a matter of deciding to do this or to not do that. It is about seeing and then letting rest of it happen. If you see the foolishness involved in some kind of wanting to become and some kind of trying to fit yourself into some image, if you see the foolishness of it, in as much as it's not spontaneous, it's not coming from your heart. Suppose something comes from heart, as one of you asked the question yesterday, Steve Jobs had used that expression. When something comes from your heart, then for that sake, stay hungry, stay foolish, he said. We are not talking of that coming from your heart. We are talking of that coming from a confused head. I saw my neighbor's son went and became a Hollywood hero. And then I say, why should I not? The thought is operating. I don't have love of acting. I don't have love of those skills. I know a little bit. I am more driven by the glamour, the glitter and glamour. And driven by glitter and glamour, I want to become something, then that is considered as a confusion in the head. If you love singing, if you love dancing, if you love acting, if you love technology, if you love spiritual studies, then give up everything and go for it. That love in your heart guides you and it cannot be wrong. And the intelligence in you will protect you. If you are slightly overdoing, you will do some mid-course correction and ensure that your basic needs are fulfilled. You will not make a fool of yourself. So Steve Jobs did not mean stay hungry, stay foolish, literally. What he meant was an emphasis on that being free from the tentacles of thought, conditioned thinking, and going by the calling in the heart. Now let's take up a further description. Lord Krishna says, Yas sarvatra nabhisnehaha tat tat prapya shubha shubham nabhinandati nadveshti tasya prajna pratishtita Yas sarvatra nabhisnehaha tat prapya shubha shubham nabhinandati nadveshti tasya prajna yada samharate chayam kurmonganiva sarvashah Indriyani indriyarthebhyah tasya prajna pratishtita yada samharate chayam kurmonganiva sarvashah. No scripture, including Bhagavad Gita, ever criticizes love. But all these scriptures ask us to be free from false attachment. In this verse once more, the word abhisneha. Sneha itself is attachment, and to make it more clear, Sri Krishna uses the word abhisneha, which is excessive attachment. In excessive attachment, we neither do good to, let's say if it is towards a person, the person, nor do we do any good to ourselves. In excessive attachment, we rob the space of the other person. I believe there was a mother who was so keen that her daughter should sleep well. So after her daughter went to bed, every 10 minutes the mother would go and shake the child. Have you slept? Have you rested? Have you gone into sleep? The daughter finally with folded hands had to say to the mother, leave me alone. I will sleep very well if you keep 10 meters distance from me. Don't come in between. This is an exaggerated example, excuse me. But all of us, every one of us, the speaker not excluded, or let me say anybody here who is a human being, that covers all, has to double check on one's attachments. Abhisneha. Whatever is well placed, whatever is in right measure, whatever does not take away space of the other person is love. When we take each other's space, or sometimes in the name of being good to each other, we actually simply gratify some foolish desires of each other. Two students who had to actually study for some examination so on were supposed to be great friends. One day one of them got so bored, let us go to a movie. And the other person, I am a very good friend of yours, I would never deny you company. And he went. Another day this fellow got bored. Let's go for a walk and eat some ice cream. This fellow said, for your sake I'll give up anything. So gratifying each other's desires without much thought. This is a simple example of movie or ice cream, but extend it. Do we do things for each other just to make the other person feel good? Hastily we say, I agree with you. Of course, you cannot be more right. Even as a part of our mind says, what am I saying? I should, if I am really his friend, if I am really her friend, I should gently question. This is not good for you. But again, by mere blind habit, we may just gratify each other, please each other, and in the process, both father and son, or father and daughter, or spouses, or friends, in any relationship, if the vision of what is right is put to the back seat and importance is given to agreeing quickly with each other. You say something and I say, of course, I agree with you, without even hearing you fully. And you agree with me hastily, without fully listening to what I am saying. In that over-eagerness to just to make each other happy, that can lead to ruin. That's called abhisneha. And this mature, spiritually awakened person is free from that kind of attachment. Anabhisneha. Certain situations are regarded by the society as Shubha. Shubha means auspicious, very good, highly desirable. Anybody would want it. But here is this person who is so alert, he sees through it and does not get attached to it. And something called very highly Ashubha, inauspicious. Because the world has generally its own standards. The world goes more by, externalities, such as money, power, fame, pleasure, and so on. In fact, we seem to criticize the so-called world, which is sometimes called the mad world. And who are the world? We only make the world on one hand. And on the other, I must hasten to add that the world is not really very foolish. It acts foolishly in a certain mass hysteria, going by the trend. You must have read in some psychology books, there is something called mass psychology. If you take a person out separately and ask him, is this what you want to do? A person gives a different reply. No, not really. I was going to do it, because all my friends said, peer pressure. There are such factors. So this world collectively has certain value systems, and all of us are caught in that. I distinctly remember when I was in school, high school, a friend of mine loved music so much, and he used to play tabla very well. And when he passed the high school, he was sitting for some competitive exams. His father actually took those tablas in their home, put it on the attic. That attic had a lock also. He locked it up and said, now for next 4 or 5 years you will not play this. You will play this tabla after you get a very good job, earn well, and so on. Now, I am only trying to convey a certain message through this. I do not say that one should let children do anything, anytime. That is not the idea. But to convey this message, how sometimes one can even be violent and utterly insensitive. And that boy was so shaken. However, in this real story, that boy did, pass some competitive exams, and he wanted to become a veterinary doctor. Vet, they call it here. And he succeeded. He was a bright boy. He had intelligence. And everybody celebrated it. And after he came out and got a very good job with good pay and whatnot, and tablas also came back to him. He started playing, though he had some hurt in him that I was denied this. And in that particular case, as I remember, it all ended in a tragedy finally. He met with an accident and died. And his father was devastated. And among the things that his father said after that boy died, said, "Oh, I never knew this would happen. I suppressed him, I forced him to do this or do that, and my dear son obeyed me, did not say one word against me," and so on and so forth. Anyway, we say society has its own values. So the father in this example, don't take the example totally to draw some conclusions, try to get the flavor of it. As I already used such expressions, do we rob each other of space? Do we take away freedom in the name of love? Do we, imprison another person saying this, I'm doing this for your good? Do we do it? And if we are we very clear about it? In fact, after so many years of giving talks and all that, I have increasingly come to believe nowadays that the right job of a speaker, a teacher like me, is not to give any conclusions at all. The right job is to raise questions and help you go with those questions, deal with those questions, stay with those questions. 5 days you attend these talks, let us say, and suppose at the end of these 5 evenings, you have some really valuable question which the speaker did not answer at all. But that question inspires you. That question makes you really take a second look at the way you are living. The lectures have served their purpose far better than giving you some ready tips. These 7 things are to be done and these 5 things are not to be done, etc. Do's and don'ts. The do's and don'ts have some value. I, for one, do not have the vision that do's and don'ts have nothing to do in life. I guess niyama means rules. Rules have a place, I suppose, but I have come to appreciate, to share with you my own journey, that certain existential questions. By using this adjective existential, what we mean is, it is not some bookish question. It's not some theoretical question that somebody went after and got a PhD also. We don't want PhD here. Existential question is something that actually relates to the way you live. It is about your human existence. If a certain existential question, a real question, which actually shapes your joys and sorrows, a real question which also affects the joys and sorrows of people around you, suppose such a question seizes you, then you may not remember anything else through the lectures, but being seized with or by this question would take you far. So here Sri Krishna says, na abhinandati, na dveshti. This person is not carried away by the social values, by the society's standards. He doesn't hate the society, but he is not carried away by the society. When the society applauds him, Shubham, he perhaps thanks them, thank you very much, but his eyes are open. Am I really in a position that I should celebrate? He inquires. He is not hijacked by the applause and the praise. And when the society criticizes him, what a fool you are, he says, I don't mind staying foolish. So I would stay hungry, stay foolish. It's very, very spiritual to say, stay hungry, stay foolish, when you understand it in that context. For you are not swayed by the societal values, which are a certain collective phenomenon, very questionable. At different times, the society is mad after different things. I suppose in the first half of the 20th century in the country of India, there was such great craze about becoming attorneys. So Gandhi and Nehru and everybody from any big family became an attorney, went to England. The dream was to come back as bar at law. And then there was a craze about IAS, ICS, administrative service and so on. Then again these engineers, doctors, something else, something else. So at various times there are waves rising. So I too would not condemn the society. Society has its own dynamism. God bless the society. God save the society. But you better be careful. Don't be carried away. Then Shubham na abhinandati, Ashubham na dveshti. And tasya prajna pratishtita. In the following verses, and very significantly, very importantly, without laying undue emphasis, in other words, laying an emphasis that is due, Sri Krishna touches upon our relation with pleasure seeking. In the verse we already read, giving us the example of the tortoise, he says, have you seen a tortoise? At the slightest chance of danger, the tortoise withdraws its limbs into or inside its hard shell. So something falls, some object, some stone, something falls upon the shell. The shell is strong enough to bear that force, and it's soft, its muscular limbs are protected. Now this example is taken or is set in the case of fear. Please don't bring that fear into the theme proper. Examples have their limitations. We always have to know in what context or in what aspect the example is given. The ability to withdraw at will, within an instant. The ability to withdraw in an instant is what is applied to the theme, not out of fear. That is, nobody should interpret this verse as, like a tortoise is afraid and withdraws its limbs. This realized person is always afraid. You take a plate of sweets, gulab jamun or rasgulla, immediately he is afraid. No, don't bring the fear part of it. When necessary, when required, when his wisdom, his inner viveka, inner discrimination says to him or her that, oh, this is not something that I should go for. He is free of those habitual forces. There is nothing like old habit which would anyhow push him or drag him to the, enjoyment. It is said, Indriyani Indriyarthebhyaha Samharati or Samharate. He is able to withdraw. That means there is such great alertness. There is great presence of mind. There is a great natural, spontaneous, not thought-driven. When we say natural or when we say spontaneous, what is meant is, it is not by his thinking, what did that book say, what am I supposed to do? Or what did my uncle say, what did my father say, what did my guru say? These are all, then we become second-hand human beings. If you and I are acting all the time by remembering what is said in the book or by X or Y, then what do we have to say? I don't know, but my uncle said, my aunt said, or Guruji kaha karte the. In North India they have an expression. Hamare dadaji hamesha kaha karte the. There's a strange usage in Hindi language. So therefore, I am doing this, and so on. So that is second-hand behavior. If you have lived alertly, then out of that living alertly, moment to moment, and if you say, what if I have not lived alertly so far? Start now, from this moment. Living alertly, living with certain watchfulness, puts to rest, see the science of it. It sets at rest the so-called mere habitual tendencies. When you and I go towards an object, there are two possibilities how we went towards it. One is out of a factual appreciation. At this moment I am hungry, I need food. I really like that object, it is really beautiful, and I wish to take it. This is one, where it is fact-based. And another way we are drawn to something is, well, all my neighbors have got it, I better take it. Some kind of imitation, some kind of comparison. Or, whenever I came to this part of the town, I gobbled some of those food items. By mere habit. Suppose, you go to some part of the town where there is a restaurant, and yes, you had enjoyed some good food there 2 or 3 times. But today you have gone there after a hearty meal at your home. You have no hunger at all. And yet, when I come to this road, I have to get in there, and I have to. So, this is called habit-driven, where there is no factual, present moment evaluation is not there. Am I hungry? Can I eat? If you ask that person who is merely driven by habit, he says, that is my regret. I should not have eaten at home, He is regretting. Oh, I didn't know I would come to this part of the town. If I knew, I would have starved from morning and eaten as much as possible here. So this is called a certain attachment to mere habit, and then one goes beyond moderation. One cannot be moderate, one cannot be true to one's senses. In fact, one destroys one's senses in the process. One's senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue and skin, one's indriyas, by such confused indulgence, which disregards the true need, disregards the real requirement, disregards their really being hungry, etc., but goes by thought. See, stomach is hungry, then you eat. This is biological, this is natural. Stomach is not hungry, you have had a hearty meal. But memory, thought, The memory of a pleasure enjoyed last time says, here I have to eat from that restaurant, and so on. I have heard that there is some kind of ailment somewhere where people even vomit out food and go second time for food. They just enjoy. It's a psychological disorder. So Sri Krishna says, when there is no such foolish running towards pleasure, pleasure has a place in life, enjoyments have a place in life, but they are part of, or they are included in that greater awareness. Primarily, you live a wakeful life, not a sleepy life. You are awake, you are aware, you are up and active, and then maturely you go about enjoyments, pleasures, all the indriyas. Even karmendriyas are also meant. Please do not think that this is only about eating and drinking, etc. What about talking? Many a time we want to talk, and the other person says, you have said this to me 10 times. Oh really? So here 11th time, you have heard 10 times. We say, oh, you have said this joke, you have told me this story. Sit down, hear once more. Why? I feel like telling once more. I have to take it out of my chest. That doesn't speak for maturity, but that could be the reality with us at a certain point of time. What are we to do? In fact, some of you may say, Swamiji, it's very interesting to know about Sthita Prajna, but I have realized that I am far from this Sthita Prajna. What am I to do? We have answered it already. Begin now, not by memorizing some slokas, etc. You may do it secondarily, but primarily begin with greater self-awareness. Be aware of how your mind operates. Great changes will come by. Tasya prajna pratishtita. So I have labored to explain this as not so much out of sankalpa, out of will, out of decision, but over a length of time. If you have lived alertly, then you will yourself see. Naturally it will come. You will be surprised. Hey, how come I am not acting mechanically? How come my indriyas are under check now? How come I felt like talking, but without much struggle, I have withdrawn myself, seeing that this is not the right time, and the other person knows already, why should I repeat? Without much struggle. Then that is being described here. The tortoise withdraws its limbs without any struggle. It comes naturally to the tortoise. In that way, naturally, where you may eat, where you may talk, you do it, and where it is not appropriate, you do not do it. In either case, there is no struggle or conflict or suppression or some kind of battle within. That's what is being described. And if our question is, oh no, for me everything is a struggle. There are some people who say, before I came to all these Gita classes, I had no struggle. I felt like eating, I just ate. Now, after hearing your lectures, we are in such trouble. We cannot eat anything peacefully, we cannot drink anything peacefully. Everywhere you have generated conflict, sir, they say to us. We say, no. We have only thrown light on your way of living. Now you cannot go back. Now, don't simply try to pretend like a Sthita Prajna. Having recognized that you have certain impulses, you have certain, habitual ways of either senses or the emotional side of you. It's like people say, I don't want to get angry, but I get angry. I don't want to say some bad words, but those bad words come out of me. Okay, we agree. Never mind. You have to accept yourself as you are at this moment, but the best thing you can do is right this moment, starting from this very moment. Do not condemn yourself, do not justify yourself. Let there be a sincere effort on your part to understand yourself. take the moderate path, take the path of moderation, and don't lose your energy in condemnation. If you speak 2 words more than what is needed, don't say, "Ayyo, again." That is a waste of energy. You spoke more, you ate more, or you did something, and there are certain agitations, thanks to the Gita class you heard. Then, all right, be aware of those agitations and say, is there a more mature way of going about handling myself? And then take a look at yourself. Then you will find the wonder of wonders happens. You will find that the same mind which used to just swing between indulgence and regret, aparadha and paschatapa, and like a pendulum, it was going back and forth between committing an error and then regretting it, and again getting ready to commit once more, renewing oneself that way. Rather than doing that circus, your mind will settle down, and you will find that as a side product, not by your planning towards it, as a side product of your living a gentle, wakeful or watchful life, as a side product, various impulses, physical or emotional, become less and less, and you find a certain peace rising in you. Let me stop here for tonight.